Hello, everybody. This is Glenn Loury, host of The Glenn Show, professor emeritus of economics at Brown University, and distinguished visiting fellow at the Hoover Institution. And I am with my good friend and colleague and collaborator, Rajiv Sethi. Rajiv Sethi is a professor of economics at Barnard College of Columbia University and author of the newsletter that's published at Substack called Imperfect Information. And he is a source of interesting commentary on economics and other matters. And being a faculty member at Columbia University, I thought it would be useful to hear from him about what's going on there in its the university's contestation with the U.S. government over questions of antisemitism and related matters. So welcome, Rajiv.
Oh, thank you. Glad to be back.
So this is in the news now, $200 million kind of compact with the federal government. Have you studied the agreement and what's your initial reaction?
So yes, I have looked at the agreement. It's very short. It's available online for folks who want to look at it. It's $200 million to the U.S. Treasury, as you said, without any admission of wrongdoing on the part of the university. And there's another $21 million to a compensation fund for folks who want to make claims that they were victims of discrimination, or for the two janitors who were held for a time in Hamilton Hall when that was occupied. So that's the financial aspect of the deal, and then there are a whole bunch of deliverables that the university has to provide, which range from its admissions, its hiring, single-sex spaces, anti-Semitism, disciplinary actions, balance in the curriculum, and so on. So there are a whole bunch of commitments that the university has made as part of this deal.
Yeah. So individuals will be able to make claims for or are automatically entitled to compensation from the $21 million fund. This is settling Equal Employment Opportunity Commission complaints.
Yes, they can do so anonymously. They'll have to file claims. They can do so anonymously. This is something that Columbia did recently with a major settlement regarding one of their physicians. Basically it's, people, the funds will be distributed in some way based on who applies and what the hierarchy of claims happens to be.
Who's eligible? Do you have to be Jewish, for example?
No, I don't think so. For example, there are two custodial staff members who were
Torres and Wilson, if I recall.
Yeah, so they were in Hamilton Hall when it was occupied. They are certainly eligible. In fact, they're mentioned explicitly.
They were in the building that was seized by demonstrating protesters and were intimidated. Are they the only non-Jewish claimants?
I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I think they're the only non-Jewish claimants who are specifically mentioned. But in principle, anyone who has been subject to discrimination under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act or any other discrimination claim can come forward.
Okay. Well, that's a reckoning with the consequences of the protest in the spring of 2024, culminating in the spring of 2024 in the aftermath of the October 7th attack in southern Israel. Have we got the anti-Semitism problem at Columbia under control now?
Glenn, I have written and believed for some time now that the anti-Semitism claims against Columbia were pretextual, really. What's been happening with the university was outlined in speeches and conversations that J.D. Vance and others had 4 years ago, well before October 7th. They implemented changes in the new College of Florida. There were attempts to make changes in state universities like Wisconsin and North Carolina. So, yes, I mean, anti-Semitism is mentioned, but if you look at the agreement, it's really about broad range of things, including admissions policies, hiring policies, and so on. Yes, I think Colombia has taken steps to deal with anti-Semitism, but that was never, I think, central. Had there been no attacks on October 7th, I think we would still be seeing something roughly similar to what we are seeing. But yes, regarding anti-Semitism specifically, Colombia has adopted this IHRA definition of anti-Semitism.
That's the International Holocaust Remembrance Association.
Yeah, that's right. And the definition itself is not itself controversial, but there are examples that are used as a supplement to the definition, and these involve things like speaking of Israel using double standards or associating Israeli policy with the Nazis, or various kinds of speech acts that FIRE, for instance, has found to be inappropriate for disciplinary purposes. So what happened at Columbia is that in August of last year, there was a second report by a task force on anti-Semitism, and they recommended that this IHRA definition be used for training purposes, for educational purposes, but not for disciplinary purposes. Now, Colombia, shortly before this agreement with the government was announced, decided to incorporate this into their equal opportunity disciplinary processes, which is a major change. And actually, this led one of the Columbia historians, Rashid Khalidi, who has recently resigned, but was planning to teach a course with, I think, 300 students registered in the fall. And he has canceled his course. There's an open letter in The Guardian recently published a few days ago, because he feels that if you're going to have this definition as part of the disciplinary infrastructure at Columbia, students will not be able to speak their minds. Teachers will not, teaching assistants will not be able to have meaningful discussions about the Middle East, and he won't be able to teach in a manner that he thinks is suitable. So it's already having repercussions of that kind. So that's with regard to anti-Semitism. Yeah.
Rashid Khalidi has resigned from the faculty of Columbia University.
He's retired. He's not resigned. Sorry, if I said resigned, I misspoke. He's retired, so I think he's emeritus, but he was still planning to teach as a as a visitor. Yeah, in the fall. Yeah.
He is a distinguished historian of the Middle East situation.
Absolutely. So actually, people can go read his letter. In The Guardian. It's not paywalled. And he explains his reasoning for having canceled the course. And he's going to have some public lectures that will be accessible to others, to more broadly, not just Columbia students, over the course of the semester. But he's canceled the course. Columbia did not cancel the course. He canceled it himself.
There seem to me to be two distinct points here. One, you say that the anti-Semitism crusade is pretextual, an excuse to attack institutions which are loathed by the administration for broader political purposes, not just in protection of their Jewish faculty and students and staff. The other you say is that part of the resolution of the conflict with the government, Columbia has agreed to use the IHRA's definition of anti-Semitism as a guideline to its own disciplinary administration. What's the significance of that? Why is that such a bad thing? Is Rashid Khalidi correct in his assessment that it's going to limit free speech and academic freedom prerogatives?
I think it will. It will make people more cautious about expressing certain views. It will stifle debate. And this is the kind of thing that actually one of the lead authors of this definition of anti-Semitism is strongly opposed. He wrote an op-ed in the New York Times in 2016. I'm forgetting the name now, but he's really one of the lead authors of the report on which this definition is based. And he thought it should never be used for disciplinary purposes. The same point has been made by FIRE. They have a webpage dedicated to this definition, and they also make the same point. So it's not just Khalidi. a lot of folks think that this is actually bad. It's actually counterproductive. It doesn't even serve the purpose that it's intended to. The discussion is, broadly speaking, is not going to be stifled, but it is stifled in certain quarters.
Can you think of an example of how that might be so? I seem to recall concerns about, for example, not being able to refer to Israel in particular critical ways, or the presumption that it's anti-Semitic if you question certain, widely embraced narratives about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But I can't remember the specifics.
So, for example, referring to being critical of Israeli actions without being equally critical of other democratic nations, who might be conducting themselves in similar ways, is treated as anti-Semitic, according to one of the examples associated with this definition. Believing that the Zionist project is a racist endeavor, stating something to that effect is considered anti-Semitic according to the definition, and so on. And if that is excluded from discourse, the view is, at least Khalid's view and Fire and I forget the name of the person who came up with the definition, that this stifles discourse in a way that's actually counterproductive.
I see. Now, what about the not pretext, but the events prior to the implementation of this settlement, the events in which Jewish students were attacked, harassed, cajoled, prevented from entering certain spaces, physically confronted, made to feel unsafe. There's been a lot of talk about that. And these are the not pretexts, but the preconditions for a concern about anti-Semitism. Do you credit that at all?
Absolutely, I do. Actually, I do. And so the fund will compensate certain people who were genuinely harassed and genuinely harmed. I don't mean to suggest that anti-Semitism doesn't exist or isn't a problem. That's not at all what I was trying to suggest. What I was trying to say is that even in the absence of the demonstrations, the occupations, the classroom disruptions, we would be seeing something similar in terms of federal action against the universities. That was the point I was trying to make. It happens to be linked to the demonstrations and the protests, but had they not existed, there would have been something else. I didn't mean to suggest at all that anti-Semitism is not a problem. It's a problem worldwide, no question about it, and certainly at Columbia too, and it needs to be dealt with, and it is being dealt with. But that's not. I think the focus really, with regard to the enforcement actions against universities, ought to be on a whole bunch of other stuff, like especially with regard to admissions, with regard to hiring, with regard to single sex spaces, things like that. Those are the priorities of the federal government, and they would have been in place even in the absence of these demonstrations.
So, talk a little bit about that aspect of the agreement having.
That's to me the most interesting as an economist.
Admissions, hiring, transgender issues, things of this kind.
Yeah. So let's start with admissions. So my last post on this dealt with the admissions issue. So the Columbia Agreement, unlike the Brown Agreement, we can talk about the Brown Agreement if you like also, but
I'm going to confess that I have not studied as yet the Brown Agreement. I am emeritus professor, and my responsibilities do not any longer entail committee meetings.
It's okay. It's again very short and easy to summarize. And I can talk about the differences with Columbia. But let's talk about admissions. This is an extremely interesting issue, and I think raises some questions that we as economists should give some thought to. So,
okay, this is an insistence that not racial affirmative action be not practiced by the university, and provisions for the government to monitor the university's admissions so as to avoid the use of race in an inappropriate way.
That's exactly right. And the interesting question is how compliance with that directive will be assessed. So let's think about that for a second. So the agreement calls for a resolution monitor who's been selected already by mutual consent of both parties. And the resolution monitor will be given admissions data, so applications data, selection data, people who receive offers of admission, along with various attributes, race, national origin, and so on, as well as performance data, classroom performance data for those people who end up being enrolled. So the question then becomes, how is the resolution monitor going to verify that the process of selection was merit-based? So the agreement calls for merit-based selection. And there are various possibilities. I don't know how he plans to do it, but there are various possibilities. For example, you could think of let's say an academic index, weighted average, let's say, of a standardized test score and a grade point average. And you could try to see whether or not people belonging to different identity groups have different probabilities of selection, of admission, conditional on their academic index, right? That's one way to try to think about whether selection is merit-based.
That, by the way, excuse me for interrupting, is what the plaintiffs in the Students for Fair Admissions lawsuit that culminated in the Supreme Court's 2023 striking down of racial affirmative action. That's exactly how they fashioned their argument in court, by alleging that the Asian students with a given academic index were less likely, statistically significantly less likely, to find admissions success at Harvard and at the University of North Carolina.
That is correct. And also, following the passage of Proposition 209 in California, universities were required to use a selection process that was based on an academic index that took a weighted average of GPA and standardized test score. So yes, that's a way of testing whether or not a university is engaged in merit-based admissions practices. Now, that's a very narrow view of merit. I have written and thought and talked about merit quite a bit on my newsletter, but also in my academic writing. There's a paper in the Journal of Economic Literature, for example, called Meritocracy and Representation, where I tried to unpack really what merit would entail, and to see whether or not tests such as this would identify deviations from merit-based admissions, when in fact the admissions policies could reasonably be defended as being merit-based. So let me give you a couple of examples. So when Dartmouth, I think last year, decided to go back to requiring test scores for admissions, the rationale that they gave was that certain students who were coming from less advantaged backgrounds were choosing to withhold their test scores under a test optional policy, when in fact submitting test scores would have been to their benefit. Why would it have been to their benefit? Because Dartmouth takes into account not just your test score, but also the distribution of test scores in the high school from which you're applying. So if you take a test score, a given test score, and you look at students who are applying from a range of different schools, Dartmouth would interpret that score differently depending on the school from which you're applying. And the student, and now that kind of policy, if it happens to be the case that race, color, national origin is correlated with the distribution of scores from the school in which you're applying.
Well, we know that is the case, as a matter of fact.
Absolutely. So that Dartmouth policy, which can be defended on grounds that it's based on merit, because you're interpreting the score, differently for people based on the advantage of the backgrounds from which they're applying, would appear to the resolution monitor as being a violation of merit-based admissions. This to me is absolutely crucial. I can give you other examples, but this very simple policy that I think most people would consider to be really quite reasonable, it's not conditioned on race, color, or national origin, and can be defended on grounds of merit, would then be treated as if it's a violation of the agreement between Colombia and the federal government. This could be a potential problem for Colombia, unless they can convince the resolution monitor and provide the resolution monitor with data that is above and beyond what is called for under the agreement.
Well, let me just comment, Rajiv, that it
Yeah,
seems it's a measurement problem, not a conceptual problem. That is, the raw test score does not adequately measure what we're really interested in, which is the underlying academic potential of the student. The
yeah,
test score contextualize that score within the context of those who had a similar environment, brings more information to bear. I could still be a 100% merit focused person
yeah,
and uh, decide that for a kid coming from an inner city high school, a certain test score meant one thing, and a kid coming from a suburban, well-heeled high school, it meant another.
yeah.
That's not a difference in principle. It's not an argument against merit. It's a
Yeah.
question about how merit would be assessed.
That's exactly right. And so, depending on how the resolution monitor chooses to measure merit or assess merits, you will either run afoul of the agreement, or you will be thought to be in compliance with it.
But the reason I raise this point is because you can run this in the other direction. You could start out with the objective, I want there to be more Black students admitted to the university, and then invent definitions of merit such that you reverse engineered that outcome. The question would
Good.
be whether the motivation for the definition of merit was either some neutral motivation or was an indirect way of justifying a racial. I know I'm going to have a racially more beneficial in terms of Black representation outcome
Yeah.
if I contextualize the SAT score. So
Yeah.
the move of contextualizing the SAT score would have to be defended on its
Yeah.
own merits. There'd have to be experimental or other evidence suggesting the validity of the contextualization that had the effect of increasing
Yeah.
Black representation.
Excellent point. However, it's worth pointing out that if you were to if a university were to adopt this approach to assessing merit in an instrumental way, in order to increase, let's say, racial diversity, they would not then be able to admit people belonging to groups that are underrepresented but come from elite high schools. That was the case under affirmative action prior to the Supreme Court ruling. So it's not as if it replicates the pre-Supreme Court ruling admissions policy. It is still different, even if it is instrumental. Now, I'm not saying it is or it isn't, and the issue is important, and the resolution monitor will presumably look at this, but it's not just replicating the policy that was in place prior to the Supreme Court ruling.
I see.
And if you let me, I'll mention one thing, because this
Of
is a
course.
very interesting. There's a very interesting article by Roland Fryer, whom we both know well. You know much better than me, in the Wall Street Journal from a while back, about contextualization. Frankly, so he talks about his math GRE scores when he applied to graduate school were high, but when he arrived in grad school, he was at Penn State. He was surrounded by people whose scores were higher. But he points out in this op-ed in the Wall Street Journal from a few months ago that his father was in prison. He hadn't yet to meet his mother, and that his scores, ought to be interpreted in that context. And in fact, his acceptance into graduate school and his subsequent achievements as an economist, I think, bear out the importance of taking into account such contextual factors. He doesn't treat race as a contextual factor. He treats other kinds of circumstances that in principle could apply to people belonging to any group as contextual factors. But once you start taking contextual factors into account, such as these, you're going to potentially run afoul of a resolution monitor who's working with very limited data, unless you provide them with very detailed explanation for your admissions choices. So just to wrap up, what I suggest that Columbia does, and I really hope that they do this, is to provide information, statistical information on the high schools from which people are applying, explain exactly how that information is being used, defend it on grounds of merit, and then submit a list of students who are being admitted based on contextual factors that are much harder to quantify, such as those mentioned by Roland. Now, whether it works or not remains to be seen. But I have felt, Glenn, long before the election, months before the election, I felt that admissions policies at universities ought to be much more transparent. That the public has lost faith in universities. The trust and confidence has gone down precipitously, especially among Republicans, but also among Democrats and independents. And one of the things that universities need to do is to just be, crystal clear, transparent, especially about the manner in which they conduct their admissions policies. So my suggestion is for Columbia to do this. And if the resolution monitor believes that they are deviating from merit-based policies, then to have a conversation and work from there.
No, all of this talk about test scores and admissions selections procedures is prospective. It is, we're trying to define merit, and then we're trying to select a meritorious class, and the instruments that are being used is what's being discussed. But what about retrospective? What about the idea you admit a student?
Yeah.
The monitor wants to know whether or not the student has been admitted with an unlawful racial preference.
Correct.
Rajiv Sethi argues, no, the SAT score may not be as high in absolute terms, but in relative terms, it is indicative of merit. Well, if Rajiv Sethi is right about that, then post-admissions, I ought to observe that student doing well in comparison to other students who did not enjoy the benefit of coming from a high school with a low average SAT score. So why not compare the post-admissions performance of the Black students, the white students, the Jewish students, the Asian students, and see whether there's evidence in the retrospective data of preference having been used in the admissions. It takes a little longer. You need the 4-year career of the college student in order to have a full assessment. But it seems to me that would be a robust way of determining whether anybody's theory about merit was correct or was a subterfuge and a cover for a illicit motive.
I mean, Glenn, as usual, you hit the nail on the head, and in order to conduct this assessment, the university, Columbia in this case, is required to submit to the resolution monitor data on post-enrollment performance, but anonymized, but with race, color, national origin included, and that would allow the resolution monitor to carry out exactly the kind of analysis that you have laid out just a moment ago. Now, one could argue that one's performance in 4 years, of classroom activity should not be the end of the story. What really matters and what is really consistent with the mission of the universities is your performance over the course of your lifetime. In the example of Roland, it's not so much his performance in graduate school, really. That's important. It's the subsequent placement, the subsequent publications, and so on, and influence on the profession, influence on society that really matters.
As someone who knew Roland when he was in graduate school and has worked with him throughout his career, I can say that that's absolutely correct. You would have never seen in the Roland of graduate school the productive scholar who has emerged subsequently. I mean, you saw glimmers of brilliance and insight and whatnot, but he surpassed anything that you would have forecast based on how he was doing in graduate school.
I mean, it was really an inspired admissions decision, right, by Penn State. They've got few people who have gone through their program who have achieved that level of postgraduate accomplishment. Now, if you were to evaluate the admissions policies at the point of graduation, you would miss that. But the resolution monitor does not have access to the career trajectories of these folks who are being admitted now into Columbia. So that raises difficulties of the following kind. As you said, one could have pretextual admissions. You're trying to further diversity goals, and you use seemingly merit-based policies, but whether or not you are doing so or not can't really be assessed based on the data that's available to the resolution monitor. This is a hugely important and thorny issue. I think that Colombia is going to have to deal with. Now, Brown's agreement, we can get to that if you want.
Yeah, let's do it.
Brown's agreement doesn't have a resolution monitor. So Brown
Right.
is also required to use merit-based assessment. There are interesting differences between Brown's agreement and Colombia's. For one thing, the 50 million payment that Brown is going to make is not to the U.S. Treasury. It is, to local sort of employment development initiatives that are consistent with mission. And I credit Christina Paxson with this. Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that this is something that she worked out as an economist.
This is the president of Brown University, who is an economist and
who's a very distinguished economist, and she has managed to have the payment by Brown be much more mission consistent and much less seeming like it is a fine. Although Colombia doesn't admit any kind of wrongdoing, the payment to the U.S. Treasury of $200 million will be interpreted by some people as a sort of implicit admission of some sort of wrongdoing, I suspect. Now, Brown doesn't do that. Now, that's not the issue that I was going to focus on. With regard to admissions data, for Brown, they are required to do exactly the same thing, admit people without conditioning on race, color, or national origin, based on the Supreme Court ruling and based on Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. But the data that they're going to provide is not to a resolution monitor. It will be provided directly to the U.S. government, and the U.S. government is going to assess compliance with this. And that raises an interesting question: is Brown in better shape than Colombia, or in worse shape than Colombia? And a lot depends on the perspectives of the resolution monitor. In Colombia's case, how persuadable they are that a reasonable merit-based policy may fail certain naive tests of merit. But my guess is that Brown may be better off with a resolution monitor if they can trust if it's somebody that's assigned by mutual consent.
We've been talking about student admissions decisions. What about faculty hiring decisions? There's also provisions in these agreements that bear on that as well, not using race in faculty hiring.
I haven't looked as closely at that, Glenn, but again, they are required again to have their hiring based on criteria that do not condition on race, color, or national origin. This is the language from the Civil Rights Act, and they have to provide again to the resolution monitor in Colombia's case and to the government in Brown's case data on their searches, on their applications, on the people who are invited back to campus, offers made, offers accepted, and so on. So in that sense, it's similar, but the admissions case is one that I've thought about more deeply.
No more mandatory diversity statements from applicants for jobs where they have to testify to their commitment to the ideals of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
No.
Do you know the evolutionary biologist Colin Wright?
I do. I saw that he's filed a suit against Cornell. I don't know him.
A piece in the Wall Street Journal to that effect. I don't know him either. I just know his name. I've seen it in the literature over the years.
Yeah, I don't know him either. I have seen some of his social media activity, and I know that I've seen the Wall Street Journal piece, and I also know that he's filed suit against Cornell for a search from which he was excluded, in his view, on illegal grounds, because it was not an open search. It was, people were essentially invited to apply. I think that kind of thing is going to really, that kind of thing, if Colombia were to conduct a search in that way, I think the agreement would be violated. I think the resolution monitor would find the agreement to be in violation.
How are your colleagues reacting to the agreement that the university has struck with the government?
So, Glenn, I think that my colleagues, of course, there's a range of opinion. I haven't spoken to people specifically about the agreement, but for the past couple of years, and especially after the election, I have had the feeling that people don't really appreciate the asymmetry of power between the federal government and the universities. There is a sense that if only the universities were less spineless, if only they could get together, if only they had some fight in them, they could end up, with the courts on their side and resist the pressure from the administration. I think that view is extremely naive. I think that the power asymmetry is massive. For example, the federal government can decide that no visas would be issued to anybody with an acceptance letter from Harvard, for example. In fact, they suspended all international student visas for a time. The process has now resumed. Those decisions are not reviewable in court. They are not. There's a Supreme Court ruling that very clearly establishes that you cannot go to court if a consular office, let's say in Beijing or in Delhi, refuses point blank to give a visa to any student with an admission letter from a university that is under investigation for Title VI violations. That's just one example. There's the accreditation process. There are civil rights lawsuits. The annual budget of the Department of Justice is $30 billion. They can, of course, that's for enforcement for all kinds of activities, but the universities, Harvard's endowment at, I think, $53 or $54 billion is peanuts compared to the power of the federal government. It simply cannot withstand the kind of pressure that the federal government can exert on it. And so, my view is that if the administration were to want to destroy the universities, it could be done. It could be done well before the end of this current administration's term. Now, do they want to do that? My sense is that there are two views in the administration, as there are on tariffs and on a whole range of other issues. One view is that, we don't care. Let's destroy a couple of universities and set an example. This is J.D. Vance's view, as stated in his Conversations, podcasts, and speeches from 4 years ago, which is basically conservatism in America cannot thrive. Universities are factories of indoctrination. They are completely taken over by the left, in his view. And it would be good for America, actually, if they were either taken over, meaning that administration loyalists are installed as presidents and trustees, or failing that, destroyed. He's quite explicit about that. But I think there's another view in the administration that sees the universities as absolutely critical to our economic growth, our productivity growth, balance of payments, as our, we are global leaders in higher education. There's a reason why we get so many international student applications. It's because there's no effective competition from anywhere else for what's provided by U.S. higher education institutions. Our balance of trade in services is in surplus, unlike our balance of trade in goods, and that's in large measure to do with things like Hollywood production of movies, tourism, and foreign students in our universities.
Finance.
I'm sorry.
Finance
and consulting. Yes. Finance, consulting, insurance. Yes. Absolutely. Pharmaceuticals also. Yes. I don't mean to suggest that it's only the cultural products. Or higher education. And furthermore, you get this universities sort of incubate innovation. I mean, you've got the tech sector rising around Stanford and Berkeley for a reason. You've got a whole bunch of biotechnology firms in Cambridge around Harvard University.
MIT and Harvard, yeah.
MIT and Harvard. So I think that there are people who recognize this in the administration.
Okay, so the administration may not be hell-bent on destroying the universities, which is a reason that universities might resist effectively. But I assume you're going to put something against that.
No, I think that this second view, this latter, more pragmatic view, which does not want the universities destroyed, still wants to push them in a direction that is, in harmony with administration priorities on admissions, on hiring, on single-sex spaces, the definitions of male and female, and so on. They want to push them as far as they can go without destroying them. To me, the deal that Colombia has with the federal government suggests that this particular view has prevailed in the administration. It could have been a lot worse, is what I'm trying to say.
It could have been worse for the universities.
Correct. The university could have been, made into basically an elite liberal arts college. They could have strangled all foreign students and research funding.
What's going to happen to the teaching of Middle Eastern studies at Columbia, which has a storied history, Edward Said and all of that, Khalid Rashidi?
Glenn, I think the cancellation of
settler colonialism that as a framework for thinking about not only Israel but and the Zionist project, but relevant to that. Talk about genocide in Gaza. Is that going to be verboten? Globalize the Intifada. Zoran Mamdani is famously in the dock for having uttered words to that effect.
Oh, he hasn't uttered those words, but he's
or from the river to the sea, whatever, you know.
Yeah.
Are these going to be verboten formulations from the lectern at Columbia University's Center for Middle Eastern Studies and departments?
Glenn, let's set aside the more performative aspects of this with regard to slogans and so on and so forth. Rashid Khalid is a very serious historian. He has a lot to say about the Middle East, not just about Israel and Palestine, but about the Middle East more broadly. And his course actually is about the Middle East. It's not just about Israel, Palestine. And if instructors of his caliber choose to drop these kinds of courses, to not have these kinds of conversations with their students, it will be a loss, without question. Even if you disagree with their perspectives on these things, it's a huge loss, in my opinion. I don't know whether that will happen. It was not Columbia that canceled his course, but you can see the reasoning. There were 300 students enrolled, and I suspect that many of those students were Jewish. And I suspect that many of them, even if they disagreed with him on various particulars, would have found this to be an extremely interesting, engaging, enlightening course. So yes, I think that what's happening is going to have an impact, especially if instructors self-censor. They move to material that is less likely to expose them to scrutiny and reports to the administration under this definition of anti-Semitism. They don't want to be held up as bigots because they feel that their views on what's going on in the Middle East or the history of the Middle East runs afoul of this IHRA definition.
I'm thinking of Ilan Pappé's book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. Yeah. I'm thinking of
even Omar Bartov, your colleague. Omar Bartov,
yes, indeed.
Yeah. I think this is not good, Glenn. What else?
Well, this raises a couple of questions, and I know you're familiar with my argument in my small book on self-censorship that's just been published by Polity Books in the UK. And the concern is that without an explicit prohibition against speech, the social consequences of some of these developments will be to delimit the range of argument that actually effectively gets expressed in the classroom and in the public square. And it's not a statutory, it's a voluntary, in anticipation of negative social consequences, self-restraint. But it ought to trouble us, should it not? Those of us who believe in open inquiry and freedom of discussion and who want a university experience to be one in which people are challenged in their beliefs and are cultivated in the art and practice of argument, evidence, reasoning, and whatnot, to preclude the critical engagement with the profound questions that are raised by the Israel-Palestine conflict, and more broadly, uh, out of a concern not to run afoul of the anti-Semitism police. Doesn't sound like a healthy outcome for the intellectual well-being of the society. Do you agree?
I agree. I agree completely. And I think that, this phenomenon is it has been impoverishing debate on university campuses for some time on a broad range of issues. I mean, there's a huge amount of self-censorship on campus on a variety of issues. Israel-Palestine, most famously in recent years, but this phenomenon is certainly in evidence. Now, I would say one thing though. I think that if the goal of people in suppressing speech is to prevent certain issues from seeing the light of day, right? To prevent open debate on certain issues, that project is going to fail spectacularly. And you can see it happening. You can see it happening because the conversation is going to move to podcasts and newsletters. For example, I don't know if you saw the episode on the Joe Rogan podcast between Douglas Murray and Dave Smith, the comedian.
I saw it.
This is where the discussions are going to take place. If you're not going to have these discussions in universities, if you're not going to have Rashid Khalidi on one lectern and Benny Morris on the other, talking through these things with the range of, with their range of expertise and decades of scholarship, you're going to end up having these debates on the Joe Rogan podcast, and we're living in a time where you have self-censorship and limited speech on campuses on the one hand, places which should be bastions of free expression, while free speech is exploding on podcasts and newsletters at the same time, but in a very haphazard, disorganized way, where people, without the kind of years of investment in scholarship that you would find on university campuses, are stating their views. So if the goal is to prevent debate or to silence the expression of certain views, that's going to fail spectacularly. But for the students on campus, it's not a good thing.
Can't you categorize these podcasters? Maybe not Joe Rogan himself, although perhaps Tucker Carlson is another one. Daryl Cooper is another one. Candace Owens is another one. Can't you effectively marginalize them by labeling them as anti-Semites and getting enough mainstream endorsement of conspiracy theorists, etc., to discredit them? They become Alex Jones adjacent, and you can kind of contain their criticisms by tainting them with unsavory motive imputation.
You can try, and it'll stick, and some of them will deserve the appellation. but if you look at Tucker Carlson, I'm not really a fan, Glenn. I think you know that, but he has had recently a United States veteran who was in Gaza.
I saw that. I can't think of the guy's name now, but I think I saw the episode.
Yeah, you can put a link in the show notes. And
he worked with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. This fellow did.
He tells the story. Yeah, it's incredibly heartbreaking. It's poignant. You can't watch this without, if you have any humanity in you. I mean, you can't watch this without, just feeling for the incredible suffering of what's going on, of the people in Gaza right now, the children there. It's just not possible. And things are changing also in Israel. There was an episode of the Daily podcast where I'm sorry, I forget the journalist the Israeli journalist who's on a talk show over there, starting to put these things on the table, which were just out of bounds really in mainstream media discussion in Israel. And getting a bit of a backlash on the show itself, but then a huge amount of support subsequently. So I think that people, given the social media space, how it crosses borders so seamlessly, it's just impossible to ignore. And whatever one thinks of Tucker Carlson, you've got eyewitness testimony from a United States veteran on the ground in Gaza, which is unimpeachable, it seems to me. I don't think you can question the motives of this individual. And that, that speaks for itself. You can try to cast aspersions against Tucker Carlson. Like I said, I'm not a huge fan, but it really doesn't matter. You've got testimony there that's that's credible.
Yeah. Well, we shall see. I am made to think of the irony. We were talking about affirmative action earlier, and about the shift in the climate on racial policy, much less friendly to the anti-racist of yesteryear, the Ibram X. Kendis and D'Angelo types. They overplayed their hands. In Tom Cotton not permitted to publish an op-ed at the New York Times during the post-George Floyd civil disturbances, calling for a more robust law enforcement response. The sanctioning of a heterodox opinion that was not friendly to Black Lives Matter and so on. And here we are now, 5 years later, and the script has completely flipped. And I'm just wondering whether a comparable kind of backlash against the putatively acceptable opinion on this issue might not be awaiting us in the years ahead, and it will be seen by many as a rise of anti-Semitism, and it will actually abet to some degree an expression of anti-Semitic sentiment.
Yeah.
But it could be that, as where chickens coming home to roost, you overplay your hand and try to control the discourse.
It's possible. This is what I mean about attempts to suppress opinion being counterproductive in the end. It just finds its way out into the open eventually. And censorship, really, you have to have a very, very repressive society in order to effectively maintain censorship. And I don't see us even approximately close to that. So within certain closed groups, universities, for instance, or maybe certain social media spaces, certain organizations, certain neighborhoods, yes, you can have this. You can have this phenomenon where the expression of certain views is sanctioned so heavily that people just withhold. They keep their thoughts to themselves. But eventually it comes out into the open, and I think you're speculating on what might happen a few years from now because of the suppression of certain kinds of speech today, and you're thinking in particular about Rashid Khalidi's course and so on. And I think you have a point. I think that yes, and then it will come out into the open as it has done already. I think with folks who are genuinely anti-Semitic also joining their voices, in this backlash. So.
Just as some who are genuinely racist are dancing on the grave, metaphorically speaking, of Black Lives Matter, and delighting in the backlash against the diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, 100%. So for example, if you look at the expression "all lives matter," this is I've been looking at the history of this phrase. There was a time when it was uttered quite routinely as part of a string of phrases, Black Lives Matter, White Lives Matter, All Lives Matter. And then there was a point when Martin O'Malley, running for the presidency, the Democratic nomination, said something along those lines and apologized within 24 hours. And people said to him that, look, this is a racist dog whistle. You ought not to be using it. I think Hillary Clinton also suffered something like that same fate. And the meaning of the phrase shifted, and then you end up with this process of selective abandonment and adoption, where people who don't want to be seen as bigoted pull back. They stop saying it, whereas those who continue to say it are either oblivious or on principle will not refuse to censor themselves for what they see as innocuous expression. But as you said, they are pooled with out and out racists who actually do want to send a message via a racist dog whistle, and they continue to use this expression, which entrenches its meaning as, in fact, a racist dog whistle. So I think you're going to see, if your point is that we're going to end up in a few years' time seeing things like that, where genuine anti-Semitism is wrapped up with legitimate concerns about Middle Eastern policy, then yes, I think that will happen.
Now you're talking about all lives matter, Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
What about genocide as a characterization of the domination and military oppression that is being effected against the civilian population in Gaza? I'm not asking you to take a position on whether it is or is not genocide. I'm asking you to comment on the career of the term in light of the observations that you were making, what kind of people use it, how that might change over time, an effort to corral those who do use it and characterize them in a certain way. I just got a book sent to me by the publisher they're perhaps discussing here on the podcast, by Avi Shlaim, who is one of the new historian Israelis. He's an 80-year-old born in Iraq, immigrated as a child to Israel, served in the IDF, is now in England at the university, and he's a very sharp critic of Zionism. And the book is called Genocide in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a collection of his essays. It's 450 pages of historical analysis of the history of Zionism and so on. But the book is called Genocide in Gaza.
Yeah.
And I thought that was perhaps harbinger of things to come.
Yeah, it could be. I think that, if you go back...
And Omar Bartol's piece, in the New York Times just a couple of weeks ago to that effect.
And Omar Bartov is a scholar of genocide. He's
our colleague here at Brown.
Yeah.
Very distinguished scholar of genocide.
Yeah, I would say a year ago, people would react to that characterization as being an exaggeration, overwrought. It's just anti-Semitic even. But yeah, it has become far more common, far more widespread. It's not the term itself. I avoid it because the brutality of what's going on is completely self-evident. One doesn't need to talk about or debate particular labels for it. I have never characterized it as a genocide, but it's completely clear that there are war crimes being committed. Ehud Olmert has used the term war crime. And
I want to be clear, excuse me for interrupting, that I'm not alleging, I'm not trying to call it anything. I'm trying to call attention to the controversy about how it's referred to. I'm not myself taking that position. I'm simply saying that position is a marker that it's a label that has profound significance, quite apart from the factual analysis and legal disputation that might be entered into.
Yeah, I see your point. I mean, I understand that, and the fact that I avoid using that term, I just don't want to get into debates about whether it applies or it doesn't apply, because
I don't blame you.
Yeah, but at the same time, I'm not shy about pointing out that when you have got mass starvation, when you have got children, people on ICUs getting bombed, and those lives are not seen as being as precious as your own children or your own non-combatants and your own elderly and so on. I think the label doesn't matter quite so much. But you're right. Your point is that the label itself is no longer getting people. The sting of anti-Semitism charge against those who use the label has faded, no question.
Yeah.
I mean, Rashid Khalidi uses it liberally, of course, in his Guardian piece, for instance. And I mean, people can call him anti-Semitic if they like, but I just don't think that charge sticks anymore.
So what happens from here? Fall is coming. Classes will resume. Are you anticipating the students to, as it were, make more trouble on this front?
I don't know. I'll be away. I'm on leave next year. I'll be at Stanford next year.
Oh,
So I won't be an eyewitness to what happens at Barnard and Columbia. But um, I think that the universities are going to be very tough on demonstrations. They will strictly enforce the time, place, and manner rules. And I think that my own view of the demonstrations, actually, Glenn, is that they did not do anything for the cause that they were supposed to be in defense of. In fact, quite the opposite. I think that had students operated within time, place, and manner rules and just drawn attention to the incredible suffering that was being inflicted on this population, it would have been far more effective. In the same way as many people drew attention to the plight of the hostages. I think that rather than slogans, rather than the chanting of slogans and generally blatant violation of time, place, and manner rules, occupation of buildings, classroom disruptions, encampments, and so on. If you had a sort of a consistent message that, look, what is happening here will be seen. I saw this analogy in a recent piece, but I don't remember where. Will be seen historically as something similar to the U.S. bombing of Vietnam and Cambodia. The use of Agent Orange, the massive amount of death and destruction that was inflicted on the Vietnamese and the Cambodians by the United States military. That seems to be actually quite a reasonable analogy for how history might judge this operation in Gaza. Now, I don't think that the student demonstrations really drew attention to this aspect of what is going on. They drew attention really to themselves. And I think if the goal was to help Palestinians, I think that was not furthered by the manner in which these protests were conducted. That's my view.
Did you support the boycott, divest, and sanction demands of the students?
You mean their demand that the university divest from?
Yes, that's what I mean.
I
mean, you didn't like them taking over buildings and encamping. You thought that was performative. I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but I'm just trying to say what I understood you to say. And they would have been much better off to call direct attention to the suffering of the Palestinian civilians in Gaza.
That's right. That's right.
Were they wrong also to insist that their institution, in this case Columbia University, have nothing to do in entailment with supporting the government that was prosecuting these?
They were not. They were not wrong to call for it. I mean, they're not wrong to call for it. I mean, it is not a violent act, in my opinion, to call for boycott or divestment from anything. On the other hand, I do believe that universities should adopt institutional neutrality, and I think that the demand that the students made that they would not leave the encampments unless the university engaged in these kinds of boycotts and divestments, that was a non-starter from the beginning. There's no way that the university would have accepted that demand. So that means that either they would have been allowed to continue with the encampments, or the university would have forcibly removed them. Those were the only two outcomes as far as I could see. But certainly they're not wrong to ask for it. I mean, I think this is part of the debate. I think it's a non-violent ask. It's not, you can't equate the call for a boycott or a divestment with the killing of civilians.
Yeah. Oh, here at Brown, our president agreed to take the student demands before the corporation, the trustees who declined to act on it.
Yeah.
But that was a part of the settlement. The students would withdraw from encampment if the university were to take a serious look at divestment. But the trustees wouldn't go along with that, as could have been predicted.
Yeah, I mean, that's predictable, Glenn. I think Brown tried to avoid forcible removal of students from encampments and succeeded. But I don't know, it doesn't seem to me that the willingness to bring this before the trustees was going to lead to any other conclusion. I think that's a predictable outcome.
I think a cynic would say that could have been determined in advance that it wasn't going to go anywhere. So
I think so.
Okay, well, Rajiv, thanks for your time and sticking your neck out discussing these controversial issues here at the Glenn Show. I appreciate you, my friend. Rajiv Sethi, professor of economics at Barnard College, Columbia University, and author of Imperfect Information, the Substack newsletter. Thanks again, Rajiv.
Thanks for having me, Glenn.